So I said to my agent, I really would like to write a novel. And she said, don't. And I said, why? And she said, first of all, I wish I had a nickel for every nonfiction writer who said she wanted to write a novel. And second of all, if you can make a living writing, don't mess with it. You know, this is hard to do. So just do what you're doing. So that was in my head. And then I said to my then husband, I'm really thinking about writing a novel. And he said, what? You need a massive intelligence to write a novel. That's the then. I was right. So I wrote it in secret. I didn't tell him, I didn't tell my agent, I didn't tell anybody. Part of it was the same philosophy, if you're going to quit smoking, don't tell anybody, because you might not make it. But with all the negative input, I just thought I'm going to do this in secret. And I wrote the novel in the morning, and I worked on the nonfiction book in the afternoon. And when it was done, I showed it to my agent, and she sold it for a very modest sum, but it was enough for me to turn the corner. And since then, that's all I've done. And I still remember the absolute joy. I know I'd been a journalist for a lot of years, and this was before Google, this is before cell phones, this is before anything, when you had to actually drive to the Bronx to get your interview. And and I hated asking people questions they'd rather not have to answer. I mean, that was just really against my nature. The day I sat down and realized I could just make it up, it was such, that carried me for at least 5 or 6 years. I mean, that alone was exciting. That was a very long answer to your question.
No, but it's so exciting and also depressing for me, because I am a journalist and I know what it is to be plagued by the problem of precision. But I also understand that with fiction there is an endless frontier, and you do have to get it right. I mean, when you are a nonfiction writer, they said it. They can't criticize the writer. I reported it. If you get the tone, the pace, if you don't get it right, you face criticism. There must have been a challenge for you.
Well, actually, I think being a journalist was a tremendous help, because first of all, it taught me that when you sit down at the desk, you work. There's no waiting for the muse. I mean, you just sit down and you work. And you learn that writing isn't precious, you know, I've always worked for a paycheck, written for a paycheck. And my husband and I once figured out.
Is this the?
Oh, no. This
the
is
real
the good
husband,
yeah.
one we like. Okay. We just want to be clear who we like. Okay, we like him.
We once figured out that we were paying that year tuition checks to 8 colleges and universities. We have 5 children, 2 of mine and 3 of his, and some were in graduate school. I mean, it was really complicated.
Wow.
So in the last several years, I mean, we'd paid for 8 colleges. So I wrote for a paycheck, and I think that's not a bad motivation. You know, I really think it's a good motivation. I think writers I know that, that famous writer.
George Sand.
And lives in South Africa.
She was one, though. George Sand wrote endlessly to keep Chopin and de Maupassant, everybody. Yeah. But there's someone else you're thinking of. Not that far back.
I remember a writer telling me the only way you can be a writer is to have low overhead. In other words, you don't need to earn the money this is a whole complicated question, but I really think there's something behind it that there's some urgency that I think is really important in the writing. And one of the best things that can happen is when you're nearing the end of the book and you only have, say, a month left before your deadline and you're working around the clock. There's a synergy that happens there that doesn't happen elsewhere, and it's really often really wonderful things.
Except that, so now you've launched us. I wanted to talk about Jane Austen writing in secret, which I'm going to bring up, but you've launched us into a discussion of women who have to write quickly and for cash, which is in some ways sort of a theme. So I'm just going to say this one thing about Jane Austen. Jane Austen, of course, couldn't write because she wasn't supposed to write, because at that time women weren't supposed to write, and she had a tiny sliver of a desk in the hallway of her father's home, and of course from that little tiny thing she hid her work and produced for us Pride and Prejudice and Emma and all kinds of extraordinary things. And you just talked about having to write fiction in the morning and nonfiction at night. And then you also talked about having to write for cash and having to write for a deadline. And that brings us full circle to all of the women in all of your books who are in a race against something.
Wow, that's interesting. I've never thought of it.
But don't you think it's true?
I think that they're pushed to the edge. Yes, I would say I put them in situations in which I really push them to the edge, and that's just a very fun thing to do with the character. I would say though a lot of the books, yes, no, you're right. I would say you're right. I mean, I'm thinking of Weight of Water, which is really more of an elegy for something terrible that happened. Another thing that I like to do in my novels is I'm fascinated, and I'm still fascinated by how a single moment in time can change the trajectory of someone's life, many lives, forever. And, you know, in Testimony, I explored that. Certainly the whole raison d'etre for Weight of Water. And other books, I mean, this one.
But why? But so here's the little problem I have. I don't know if they told you, but coming to Canada is not real easy. Well, so because if you go on to the Anita Shreve website, which I'm sure everybody here has done at some point, Anita does something that many authors do not. And you know, I've certainly interviewed many writers, But Anita's website has themes. One moment in life can change everything. Home and family, examples of women pushed to the edge, water, loss, and grief. Most of us can't even figure out what we're going to do in a single day. The fact that you can somehow articulate the themes that you are not only thinking about, but writing about, it terrified me in a way, I have to say. Because, first of all, how did you do that? Why did you do that?
It's a really hard question to answer because a lot of it, I think, comes somewhere from the subconscious. It leads you in certain directions. But the other thing is that I'm really interested in putting a character into an urgent or desperate arena. I think that's a really good place. I mean, and love is a really good place to put a character, because love is the one thing, being in love is the one thing for which most of us are willing to sacrifice our values and make tremendous sacrifices for. And I'm also fascinated by that. But I don't think there's anything conscious about this. It isn't though I don't live with these themes, you know, in my daily life. I mean, I have. But I wouldn't say that I'm I mean, one of the things most people say about me is, wow, you don't seem tragic. You know, you smile and you're perfectly nice. But so that's why I think a lot of it comes from my subconscious, that it's just playing out old themes, or, you know, and some of it is just universal. But it's all the imagination.
But it does lead us, and we'll talk about rescue in a moment, but it does lead us to ask whether to write as closely as you do about, I'm not going to even say love, loss, pain, tragedy, death, the car over the cliff, and to do it not in a melodramatic way, because you don't. Because if you did, we couldn't read it. You don't. In fact, I'm sort of intoxicated by the fact that you write such big themes, and not once did I pull back. Have you experienced it in your own life?